Good morning and welcome to Rising. Happy Monday. We've got a great show for you. Today, I am joined by Nomiki Konst. Thank you so much for being with me.
Thank you. So excited. Brand new studio.
Yeah,
Fancy.
well, your first time in the new digs.
Liking it, yeah.
Thank you for being here. All right, we've got some breaking news to get to. Let's start with that. So this is interesting. In a Florida courtroom this morning, the government has submitted a handwritten note allegedly written by Ryan Routh, the man accused of trying to assassinate Donald Trump at his golf club in Florida last weekend.
The letter was addressed to the world and stated, quote, "This was an assassination attempt on Donald Trump, but I failed you. I tried my best and gave it all the gumption I could muster. It is up to you now to finish the job, and I will offer $150,000 to whomever can complete the job."
Prosecutors say that Routh put that letter inside a box and dropped it off with an unnamed witness months ago, far before he was caught on Trump's golf course in Florida. This letter is one of the reasons that prosecutors are saying that Routh should continue to be detained. So this part is going to boggle everybody. So this letter was not written subsequent to the assassination attempt because the tone of the letter is, "I have failed to assassinate Trump," but this was given to someone else some months ago, according to reporting from the Washington Post and others. And so this person just came forward and gave the letter. Now, it was in a box, so it's unclear whether this witness knew they had what was a credible threat of, I mean, the letter suggests he had already tried this and failed. So maybe there was some other thwarted assassination attempt we don't know about.
Maybe there was, or maybe this was one of those letters where if he wasn't able to do so, here is his guidance
this to the
world.
public.
In some weird form. I mean, it's concerning. It shows intent, it shows motivation, it shows planning. I mean, all of the things that the feds need to prosecute him completely to the law, because there were some, questions about, is he going to be able to be fully prosecuted if if it was thwarted? But now that there's intent, that opens up a whole new case.
This is someone, obviously, trying to assassinate the president or anyone else is a crazy thing, evinces some kind of mental illness, although he does have a more, compared to, for instance, the guy who tried to kill Reagan because he loved Jodie Foster or whatever, or the guy who actually succeeded in wounding Trump in the ear in Butler, Pennsylvania. That shooter, seemingly more just crazy, had Googled other targets. Where's Joe Biden? Who can I, to do something, I don't know, shocking and for attention, whereas this person seems to have a clearly motivated political agenda, was radicalized against Trump because of Ukraine and Taiwan and some other issues. I think there are a lot of questions about, he was in Ukraine at one point trying to recruit a mercenary army. U.S.-trained Afghani troops. I wonder what kind of contacts he had, if any, with the State Department or people of that nature. I mean,
I'm sure some of this will be released, maybe not all of it, or this just
maybe it won't be.
So one of those rogue actors. Because remember when things started to escalate, there are plenty of American individuals who've gone overseas to fight individually, and the U.S. does not condone that. Yeah. It's easy to get radicalized, unfortunately, in our country in this day and age, and versions of radicalization can be from going down a strange conspiracy rabbit hole to having political beliefs that are very intense and wanting to take action. And, it's those few who do it, of course, in the scope of society, with all the radicalization, with all the brainwashing happening online. There's still such a small group of people that actually are able to do these things and step up. And, of course, luckily, they've been thwarted.
I just think of time and time again where it turns out the person was known to the authorities, or the authorities have had contact with them. This is true of,
school shooters.
School shooters, civil liberties organizations like the ACLU often make call attention to the fact that, accused Muslim terrorists were, in chat rooms with the FBI or whatever for long durations of time, where the FBI, entraps them and convinces them to say they're going to buy weapons, and then they come in and arrest them. This is what happened with the kidnapping of Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan. Exactly. The whole plot was known to the FBI the entire time, and the FBI paid the informant to continue going along with it so that they would have enough evidence to eventually arrest them.
Exactly.
So, this is, how did have the resources to get to Ukraine and where else? And I don't know. I bet it would not at all surprise me if law enforcement would be incredibly embarrassed to find out they had some level of contact or knowledge of this person. I mean, he was interviewed by the New York Times.
Right.
He was mentioned in Semaphore. This isn't just some random guy.
Right, and you bring up a very good point, because sometimes they work in coalition with people because they want to uncover a greater story.
Right.
Maybe it's a bigger network, and there's an informant within the network that they're monitoring, and then they're human, they act out. So I think very smart point, and maybe we will not actually ever know if it is a national security situation.
Yeah, I mean, this is, 2 assassination attempts now in 2 months. Obviously,
Unrelated, though.
Yeah, totally unrelated, but I mean, related to the fact that Donald Trump is, I don't know, someone that some people want to assassinate, who has a level of Secret Service protection that does not seem adequate to his
Well, they've
station.
increased it since, because of this escalation.
Thank goodness,
Yeah.
finally. I would have thought the time to do that was after the first one, where they actually hit him in the ear. They killed someone behind him and then we're listening to the sheriff after the golf course shooting say, well, yeah, he has security, but not as much as Biden because he's not the president. I'm like, well, maybe he should have as much security as I don't know. I'm no one, but it seems like if they successfully shot at him, maybe you up his security.
Well, they have upped it.
Now they have
Congress
upped it.
has upped it.
Now they've
but
upped it.
this also is important because political violence is on the rise around the world. Former prime minister was killed in Japan. You've had multiple female heads of state step down because they were getting so many threats and online hate that it became a safety concern for them. I mean, it really is impacting our democracy. So it doesn't stop at the presidency, but think about congressional members. How many congressional members on both sides are targets of harassment? Yet their budgets are very limited, especially if they're in the minority or if they're not, junior members of Congress. And so they take money out of their limited budget, which is supposed to go to staff and to research and to constituent services, and they are now having to use it for security. We have to increase the security at all levels. And one more note to that FBI report, the report about the Secret Service, is they are outsourcing essentially in coordination with local authorities. And, that may not be the perfect solution. If you're relying on local authorities around the country to help you protect the president or a presidential candidate, there might be some, weaknesses in that system.
Well, my immediate question after the knowledge of this letter comes to light is, what did this witness know? Did he have any reason to check if this? Obviously, Ryan Routh trusted him enough to give him this box, so probably they knew each other, and maybe this guy knows his friend's a little crazy, and maybe you should have opened this box and read this letter sooner. Did you know what? I mean, you should have immediately called the police.
You got a box.
I'm just trying to imagine. Yeah.
Hi, I'm your friend. Can you hold this box for me?
Yeah. Hi, I'm unhinged. Here's a box. Don't open it.
Right. It
And
doesn't
then
make
it's out.
any sense.
I would open it.
Usually the friends
I would
come
open it
out
and make
and
sure
they
there isn't a
comment.
human head in there.
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
But usually the friends come out and say something
in
like,
the
he was
box?
always a little off, or he did something like this. But I haven't heard any of that except for this. Usually the
Right.
news will go forward and try to figure out friends, family, neighbors, whatever, and they'll have comments.
Right. But again, we don't know yet. It could very well emerge. We'll find out soon that we're saying well, why didn't he call the police? It could very well emerge that oh, I did call the police. I told them. I told everyone. I made all of these reports, and no action was taken. That happens time and time again with the school shooters, in particular. Everybody spoke up. Everybody said something. Nothing got done. So we'll wait and see if that's the case here. More Rising right after this. Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Nevada. Kamala Harris now favored to win, slightly favored in each of those 4 key swing states, according to pollster Nate Silver's presidential model. The Democratic nominee has over a 50% chance of winning in those 4 battlegrounds per Silver's forecast, and she has a 63% chance of victory in Michigan. And as of Saturday, she's leading former President Trump by 3 points, 49.3 to 46.9. Overall, in Pennsylvania, she has a win probability of 57%, topping Trump by 1.5 points, 48.9% to 47.4%. In Wisconsin, Harris has 56% chance of winning with a 1.8% lead over Trump, 49.4 to 47.6. Further out west to Nevada, Harris is slated to win there too, with a probability of eking out a win by 53%. She's ahead of Trump there by just 1%.
It's not all doom and gloom for former President Trump, though. A new poll from the New York Times Siena College shows he's faring better than Harris in the Sunbelt states. According to Soave, he's gained a lead in Arizona and remains in the lead in Georgia, 2 states he lost to President Biden in 2020. In Arizona, he's toppling Harris by 50 to 45%. In Georgia, Trump enjoys a slight lead over Harris, 49 to 45%. The race is tight in battlegrounds of North Carolina, too. There, Trump is ahead with 49% to Harris's 47%. It should be noted, in these states, there is a 4 to 5% margin of error.
Appearing on Meet the Press on Sunday, Democratic Senator John Fetterman did acknowledge how competitive his state, Pennsylvania, will be. And when he was asked about Harris's stance on guns, this was his response.
She was talking about gun ownership with Oprah Winfrey. She said, quote, "If somebody breaks into my house, they're going to get shot." You, Senator, are a gun owner. As the leader of a party that prides itself on advocating for gun safety, was it responsible for Vice President Harris to make those comments?
Absolutely. I think the vast majority of Americans, if you had somebody breaking into your house that might be there to harm you, you probably have the right to shoot them. And I think that's a vast majority of Americans would agree with that.
Asked about fracking, a key issue in the Keystone State, Fetterman said this.
Vice President Harris, as you know, once supported a ban on fracking when she was running for president in 2020. She even sued the Obama administration to prevent fracking off California's coast. Now she says she will not ban the practice as president. Why should voters trust that that is really what the vice president believes?
So strange why we just keep talking about fracking. Now, back in 2020, I said that that might be an issue, but it's not going to be a defining issue. And now in 2024, we're still trying to talk about fracking. And now the other side, they're talking about eating cats and geese and dogs and saying absurd things and talking about how if Trump doesn't win, he said that, you have to blame the Jews on that, and just absurd things, like having a serious policy conversation when the other side is just absolutely on fire. And here's where we are, and here we are also that it's going to be very close in Pennsylvania, and it's not going to be defined by fracking.
So we just played 2 clips. I would say that in the first one, the question was absurd and his answer was great. And in the second one, the question was good and his answer was absurd. But
I see it differently. And that's why you're there and I'm here.
Right. Obviously, many Americans own guns lawfully, responsibility for self-protection, and you should have the right to defend yourself and you're in that situation. I actually think it's probably tactically advantageous for Kamala Harris to emphasize that she is also a gun owner, because that's in keeping with the culture of America. I would like to know more information about what kind of gun she has, where she's registered to carry it. D.C. had very tough laws on guns until recently, winning a massive Supreme Court case to give the citizens of the district the right to practice self-defense in one of the least safe cities in the country. So that was fine by me there. The second question, she has had this background of she's changed a lot of the stances she had previously. Now she's not going to ban fracking. Is it sincere? Who knows? This is a question of great importance to the voters in Pennsylvania, the state most likely to decide the presidential race. So I think it's a fair question, and all of the inane statements by conservatives or whatever about pets being eaten doesn't change that fact.
Well, I think it's actually important that he does say that, is that there has been quite a bit of criticism about her past positions and her evolution on positions, and that's natural. That happens in politics. It definitely happens in presidential races. It's not anything new, and they keep bringing these things up over and over. Meanwhile, they're having a completely comical conversation that's endangering people, and as he said, blaming Jews for his potential loss. That's outrageous, and the fact that we're not discussing that enough, I think, is something worth consideration, given that it has great impact and possible dangerous consequences on individuals' lives around this country.
We're discussing at great length these things.
We are, but
the
not
whole
everybody.
media. The pet eating stuff has
been
been exhaustively litigated.
Yes. With that being said, I wish the characterization that Kamala Harris is some sort of progressive California senator was actually the case. As a progressive, I wish that she actually had been a little bit bolder on fracking. Yeah. And in Pennsylvania, there is a very strong anti-fracking movement. I wish the Democratic Party would be stronger on that issue. I also understand how she evolved because there is a national security element to this. The fact that we are trying to be energy independent and that we are now exporting more oil and gas to Europe because of the war in Ukraine, just say that. Just say, this is why I've evolved. I understand it more. That's my frustration with the Harris campaign.
She doesn't say anything. She rarely speaks. We never hear from her. She never
does
does interviews.
That's ridiculous. Come on.
She never does interviews.
It's not the point. She
She's
does
done one.
interviews. She's been running for
Uno.
We'll talk about that. But she does have an opportunity to say some of these things to certain constituencies, and there are a lot of environmental activists that could also move the margins of this election in several of these states. We did see that in the past. She has to keep this coalition she's building, this really amazing coalition of Bernie Sanders to Dick Cheney together right now.
Yeah, good luck with that.
And I think what's odd about these polls is on the national level, it does reflect the momentum. And his coalition is smaller. It is not the size of his 2020 coalition or his 2016 coalition. He's losing a lot of center Republicans. They might stay home. Trump, excuse me. But simultaneously, some of his coalition has aged out and passed away, died of COVID. She is simultaneously bringing in a younger demographic. We'll see how large they turn out in numbers. But even if it's a little bit more, a point more than normal, that could impact the election in these states too. And those voters are not easily reached through these polling mechanisms that they have that are deeply flawed, as we all know.
I mean, the Republicans have been adding minority voters to their coalition.
They have.
Trump's doing better with minority voters than
Male
Republicans
minority
for.
voters.
Well, doing better with males in general. We now have a very pronounced gender split in the country politically, which is interesting.
Women are more reliable voters, though. They're more likely to bring in a community, and I mentioned this to our producer earlier. My mother's in Arizona, and she's running around her neighborhood saying, I think that person's a Republican, but they're never Trumper. I'm going to go talk to them. I'm going to make sure that they show up and don't sit at home. That's something. I've never seen my mother do anything like that.
But if the Democratic coalition has all your diverse party, I love that, from Dick Cheney to Bernie Sanders, if it's disproportionately concentrated in states that are just solidly Democrat and then don't really matter, it's still going to be a close election. It could be a Trump win because there's not enough of those people in Pennsylvania or
I don't think that's true at all.
Georgia or whatever. And this is why these elections are so close. And right now, these polls showing her narrowly ahead in several of these states. I mean, my big question is, well, the polls had, Biden winning these, and he did win those states, but he won them by a much lower margin than the poll suggested. If there is as much of a polling error in Democrats' favor this time around as there was last time, Donald Trump is going to be reelected. Now, that might not be, we don't know. Maybe the polls do really well this time. If you look at the history of polling, usually it's for the last, 20 years or something, it's usually a slight Democratic advantage. There has been a cycle or two where there was a slight Republican advantage. It kind of balances itself out over time. But that's the big question right now.
And that's why the Harris campaign is playing it very, very cautiously right now, making sure they're speaking to specific constituencies, making sure that they're
making sure some people are speaking about the campaign on her behalf.
Well, and simultaneously, she's out there campaigning to key constituencies that need to show up, need to be rallied, the base really needs to be as excited as it's been, keeping that excitement and growing it. Mm-hmm. I do think that there are never Trumpers in places like Arizona. I do think that there are maverick type of voters there who, do not like the way Donald Trump behaves. I think the Donald Trump base the MAGA base in Arizona is very loud, but I don't think it's as large as we collectively think it is. The Republican Party is not the MAGA Party, as you know.
Well, I don't disagree with you that there are people who otherwise identify as Republicans who are over Trump and are not going to be voting for him. I know people like that in my own family, live in Michigan, could make a difference there. It's a factor, but most people in the Republican Party are still going to end up voting for Trump. He still has high favorability within the party.
We expect them to vote, of course.
He is actually more liked within the party than ever before. It's more his party than it was 4 years ago or 8 years ago, which is impossible to imagine, but they're all behind him. And
I think those are the ones that you're never going to win, right? So it's always in politics, who can we win, who can we not win? And it's going to come down to the margins. I think it's excitement versus folks staying at home on the Republican side or voting for Kamala Harris.
More Rising right after this. The Israeli military on Monday called on residents of southern Lebanon to immediately evacuate homes and other buildings where it claimed Hezbollah is storing weapons. Now, it said it was carrying out extensive strikes against the militant group. It was the first warning of its kind in nearly a year of steadily escalating conflict and came after a particularly heavy exchange of fire on Sunday. Hezbollah launched around 150 rockets, missiles, and drones into northern Israel in retaliation for strikes that killed a top commander and dozens of fighters. Now, these actions point to a wider war that many Middle East analysts have been warning about for some time. Here to break it down for us is Hussain Abdul-Hussain of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
This sounds like a very worrying escalation of tensions in the region. Can you explain what has led to this and what is likely to result?
Well, this started when Hezbollah announced that it's going to join the Gaza war on October 8th in support of Hamas. And since then, there has been a lot of diplomacy and mediation trying to convince the pro-Iran militia to stop fighting. I think there has been so many proposals for unconditional ceasefire. Israel has agreed to this kind of ceasefire so many times. Hezbollah has refused so many times, the last time of which was on Thursday when its chief came on TV and said, we will not stop if the war in Gaza does not end. So this meant that this war would escalate, which we see is happening right now.
So many of us are concerned about, World War III being what results from increased tensions between Israel and Hezbollah and then, Iran by proxy, all of this. What does the U.S. need to do to make sure that cooler heads prevail and we do not get dragged into a global conflict based on this?
I really doubt that this conflict will see Iran joining. The reason why Iran designed these proxies, the likes of Hezbollah, the Houthis, Hamas, or the Iraqi militias, is exactly for Iran not to join in any fighting against Israel or America and the West. So I'm almost positive that the Iranians will not join this. The question is, what can we do to de-escalate things? I think we tried, and unfortunately we failed so far, but we can keep on trying to convince Hezbollah to agree to an unconditional ceasefire. I think if we can ever do that, things might cool down to an extent on that front between Lebanon and Israel.
It's been stated that this targeted attack against Hezbollah with the pagers and the walkie-talkies was very effective. Do we know how much of the Hezbollah leadership has been hit? And of course, there's the tragedies of those who were in the presence of the civilians who've been struck, so I don't want to minimize that at all. But how effective was this in targeting the commanders?
What we know, according to the Lebanese Ministry of Health, the total tally of those who got killed in the pager and the walkie-talkie blast stood at 37. We also know that Hezbollah issued 35 what they called the martyrs posters. That is, Hezbollah claimed 35 of the 37 killed, which to me seems like a very high percentage or precision, if you will. The second day, I think Israel also took out at least 12 commanders of Hezbollah who were meeting somewhere in the southern suburb of Beirut. So far, I think the number is more than 500 Hezbollah fighters, of which at least 15 or 20 of the top commanders in the chain of command have been taken out. So over the past 10 months, I think Israel has thinned out the leadership and the fighting force of Hezbollah, but I'm sure this militia still has a lot more fighters to engage in this war. Now, how long this war will go, how long Hezbollah will keep on going, no one knows. But as you can see right now, there's a tit-for-tat escalation. Hezbollah keeps on increasing the rockets, and Israel keeps on retaliating on a bigger scale.
Former CIA Director Leon Panetta described the pager explosion tactic over the weekend as a form of terrorism. AOC made similar remarks. Anthony Blinken said the U.S. had no knowledge or involvement of it, and that we believe Israel should be de-escalating matters, though obviously they're not. So my question is there going to be any rebuke of the behaviors of the state of Israel given all of these concerns by top U.S. officials, including, again, we come to this time and time again, where members of the current administration express dissatisfaction with what's going on, but we continue to support and fund it.
Well, like the saying goes, it needs two to tango, and it needs two to engage in war, and it needs two to de-escalate. And we have, like I said, the U.S. has tried to de-escalate things. And on Thursday, after the pager blast, Hassan Nasrallah, the chief of Hezbollah, came on national TV and said, "There's no way we will stop this unless the war in Gaza stops." So when he said that, I think everyone knew that this was going to escalate further and further. Now, going back to the pager blast, whether it was terrorism or not, now, what do we prefer? Do we prefer that Israel just strikes a whole building to take out one terrorist with a whole bunch of civilians surrounding them, or actually go after specific leaders of Hezbollah? What we've learned so far is that Israel not only pinpointed the network of Hezbollah, because we know many other pagers in Lebanon did not blow up. And this tells us that this was a closed circuit military-grade network that Israel targeted. Unfortunately, there were 2 civilians who got killed. I think a 10-year-old girl who was handling her dad's pager, her dad being a fighter with Hezbollah. But collateral damage, unfortunately, happens from time to time. This is war, and no one can stop civilians from dying altogether. The best thing we can do is to convince Hezbollah to agree to a ceasefire, but until now, I don't think anyone has managed to do so.
If this does escalate, and it seems like that's likely at this point, especially as we near the anniversary of October 7th, what's next? What other factors are we not considering? I mean, what is Saudi Arabia's role in this? You already discussed Iran and their unlikelihood to escalate on their front, but how does this continue to play out? Because Israel is surrounded by different countries that do not agree in policy and are disputing what's happening in Gaza, rightfully so. All of these countries have a right to protect their civilians. But how does that play out in the greater region, especially with big actors like, well, obviously, the United States and Saudi Arabia?
Well, in countries that have actual governments, such as Jordan or Egypt, you see that the governments are on top of things. There are no war there. They have peace with Israel, and everything is working out. In failing states, where the government is just a rubber stamp for a militia that pledges allegiance to Iran and that actually runs the show. For example, Hezbollah in Lebanon, or the Iraqi militias in Iraq, Houthis in Yemen. In these countries, governments are unable to protect their civilians because they're unable to rein in their militias. So the militias work on their own. What you see happening is that Iran has been trying to take on Israel, and Iran has turned this game into one of the two sides should win, let's say. So Israel tried to contain them, I think, for certain periods of time. Now we're at a point that, as they say in the Middle East, either kill or get killed. Even if Israel sits back, it will have to face the consequences of these militias. So Israel has two options: either to sit back and get killed, or to go after these guys and kill them. Now, we came in and tried to convince these guys to stop, and we said, if you stop, Israel will stop. As I said, Nasrallah said there's no way, and he specifically said, in your dreams. So I think as long as this is the point, this will have to play out, maybe until someone changes their mind and decide that they're okay with a ceasefire.
Hussain Abdul-Hussain, thank you so much for joining us. Vice President Kamala Harris and her running mate, Governor Tim Walz, are on track to do fewer interviews and press conferences than any major party's presidential pairing in modern U.S. history, according to Axios. Former President Trump and J.D. Vance have done over 70 interviews, while Harris and Walz have participated in just 7, per Axios. Vance alone has done more than 7 times as many interviews and press conferences as Harris and Walz combined. And some close to the campaign say it's not by accident. Harris's team believes that limiting her interactions with the press is a winning strategy. Axios reports that the Harris campaign believes Trump and Vance draw a lot more negative attention with the additional interviews than they do. For example, J.D. Vance's comments about childless cat ladies or the Haitian migrants eating pets saga. Plus, Biden was able to defeat Trump in 2020 with his own very limited press strategy. The Harris campaign pushed back, insisting Harris and Walz have been interviewed by a range of media outlets where they often answer tough questions about important issues facing Americans.
Meanwhile, CNN's Dana Bash said it's not just quantity of the interviews, but the quality of the conversation. Let's watch.
When you listen to Kamala Harris and what she will do, you can almost start a drinking game every time she says small businesses. Let me give you an example.
Part of my plan under my economic opportunity plan going forward is that right now, startup entrepreneurs, small businesses only get a tax deduction of $5,000. Nobody can start a small business with $5,000. So I'm expanding that to $50,000. Understanding, again, that when people have the opportunity to have the resources to get started, they're going to put the good ideas, they're going to put the hard work into it.
Describe the politics of that.
She says that. She also talks about being a middle-class kid. That's also at the front of her answers. If you look at the interviews they've been doing with local media, and they've opened up a bit more since the debate, the first question is often, what are you going to do to lower prices? Which is a very hard question for an incumbent party to answer. And it has implications that are very Trumpian. It is, Trump says he's going to do mass deportation. That'll decrease demand. Trump says he'll explore more energy. That'll decrease energy costs. Democrats can point to the fact that inflation is actually, it was bad 2 years ago. It's not now. What people want to hear is, how do you make the prices go down? So everything she says is something realistic that could survive a fact check that answers a very hard question. There is not a plan to say that we're going to lower the cost of your grocery bill to what it was in 2019. There was a pandemic. There was a money supply inflation. You can't hit the button that makes that go away. But Trump has an answer that gets him through these questions. And Harris, I think, with a different set of incentives and a different relationship to something she can back up in a policy paper, she doesn't have an answer. So she goes to a larger, well, imagine a future where there are more businesses and this starts to ameliorate.
Market-driven answers.
I just wish I would hear more of them, because as we've just tallied, she does not do a lot of interviews, and maybe that is a winning strategy. Maybe the winning strategy is to not even have just a democracy or a Democratic primary. Just have your candidate forced on you by Democratic elites and their media allies, and then have that candidate do no press so we are confused sufficiently about what they actually believe in, and happen to be running against someone who is very unpopular, and it might be enough.
Listen, it's a fair point, and she has yet to answer. The campaign is not coming out with some sort of response. It could be a behind-the-scenes, insiders give some sort of exclusive to some reporter to explain what their strategy is. From my perspective, I see that they're speaking to very specific constituencies. We are in. This is the time when they have to be talking to voters directly. And we know mainstream media, not as many folks are tuning in, and they really want to get young people out, so they're doing more TikToks, they're doing more direct interview. It's not the traditional interview. And I know Dana Bash is annoyed, and I know a lot of the mainstream reporters are used to having access, but this is a different type of election. Also, letting Donald Trump talk. That is another part of their strategy. They loved it during the debate. They wanted those mics open. They wanted him to go off and on his rants, which he still did.
Kamala Harris wanted that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. Because
she wanted to be interrupted by him. She'd rather. I mean, is that an indictment though? When you'd rather the other candidate talk than you talk?
Well, because he's reminding the country, for those who might just be tuning into this election, whoever you people are, it's reminding the country of who this man is and what's at stake.
No, the only segments we do here that I don't want to talk during are ones where I think the point I have to make is pretty weak. So it shows a lack of faith in your own persuasiveness or your vision that your strategy is zip it, let him talk.
Well, because he drives his negatives up. The more he talks, the more people understand just how unhinged his policies are, how unhinged he is, and how he's just going to continue to drive instability in this country. Doesn't mean she wasn't good in the debate. She, of course, spoke in the debate. She is talking to voters. She's just talking them directly through rallies, events, and now social media. You kind of can bypass the media. I'm not saying it's good as somebody who's
I don't know. Bypass the mainstream media. I agree with that. I don't have any problem with them going past mainstream media to just speak on social media, or just ignoring the pomp and ceremony of that's all fine if it's in the service of actually, but we would like to see if you're just blasting out statements or just doing rallies, you're not getting adversarial questioning. J.D. Vance gets adversarial questioning all the time. He does these interviews.
He does.
They attack him for not tying his shoes correctly.
Well, they attack him for saying stupid things.
Well, sure,
policies.
fine. But do they attack Kamala for that? They don't get the opportunity.
They do. They're attacking her all day long. Everybody's attacking her for not doing press and about her economic plan, which she keeps reiterating. Donna Bash said, "Oh, she just keeps saying the same thing over and over." Yeah, welcome to a campaign. You have to repeat your message so people, the voters, hear it, because not every voter is watching the news all day long. They're tuning in maybe once a week. They're checking their Twitter, and she has to get it through. You have to repeat your message during a campaign. I'm sorry, Dana Bash, you may not like it, but that's how campaigns are run. They want to be on the inside. They want to have access. You know how access journalism is. They're all complaining because they're not getting a seat on the plane, or they're on the plane and they're not able to answer questions. It'll happen when she's president for sure. But right now, she needs to hit voters, and she's doing it in whatever way their campaign thinks is savviest. But they do have to get rid of this narrative that she is not communicating her plans to the public when she is.
Well, it's because she is not known for being a good communicator,
because
right?
Because the press has made it that way. They've cut up clips of her.
What? Okay, now you're going to say that that's deep fake stuff? No.
Well, some of it is a little. How many times do you say the wrong thing on TV? Or
all the time.
All the
time. I speak for 3 hours on TV every day.
Literally, you get exhausted. That's normal.
Well,
so they take a few of those and they blow it out of proportion.
No,
and I think they're afraid of also having the Hillary situation where she is. People are loving her right now, right? The second the press starts to chip away at her.
Well, that's her job.
Their
job is not to help.
Job.
It's their job. It's not their job to help get her elected. It's to manifest totally false positive vibes for the least scrutinized major political figure in modern history.
I agree that reporters, that is their job, and they should be trying to ask questions. But I also think reporters don't understand what her job is. Her job is not to just answer their questions whenever. Her job is to go there and talk to voters so she wins. There's a communication issue between the two now.
No, she's certainly trying to win, and this might be a winning strategy. I just find it to be an indictment of the process and her, if the winning strategy is her to zip it, let Trump talk, and be elected on that basis. Maybe it'll work.
I don't know.
It's going to be close either way. We'll find out. More Rising right after this. New details are emerging about the alleged relationship between star New York Magazine correspondent Olivia Nuzzi and former presidential candidate RFK Jr. Nuzzi sent nude photos to the former independent presidential candidate, per Puck News. Then Kennedy bragged to his friends about receiving the intimate photos, according to the Daily Beast. And it all eventually made its way back to Nuzzi's boss, New York Magazine editor David Haskell. The New York Post tells the story slightly differently. According to that publication, RFK Jr. is considering suing Nuzzi for bombarding him with unsolicited racy images. A mutual friend says that RFK Jr. repeatedly blocked Nuzzi's cell phone number, but then unblocked her after she had reached out via a different number and said she had urgent matters to discuss with him about hit pieces coming his way. Quote, once unblocked, she bombarded him with increasingly pornographic photos and videos that he found difficult to resist, wrote the mutual friend, as reported by the New York Post. After brief exchanges, he would block her again. Now, for context, Nuzzi is New York Magazine's Washington correspondent, known for her political features. She was previously a reporter for the Daily Beast. Nuzzi got to know RFK Jr. while doing a profile on him titled "The Mind-Bending Politics of RFK Jr. Spoiler Campaign. He Could Turn the Presidential Race Upside Down." That was published in November of 2023. Nuzzi told New York Magazine the relationship started in December of 2023 and then lasted throughout the end of August. In a statement, Nuzzi said earlier this year, "The nature of some communications between myself and a former reporting subject turned personal. During that time, I did not directly report on the subject nor use them as a source. The relationship was never physical, but should have been disclosed to prevent the appearance of a conflict."
Meanwhile, RFK Jr.'s team has said, quote, Mr. Kennedy only met Olivia Nuzzi once in his life for an interview she requested, which yielded a hit piece. Nuzzi has been placed on leave, and New York Magazine has employed a third-party firm to conduct an audit of Nuzzi's work that will inform the nature of disciplinary action taken. Nuzzi was previously engaged to Politico's Ryan Routh, but they have since broken up. Routh, by the way, was fired from The New Yorker in 2017 over allegations of, quote, improper sexual conduct. In a statement, Liza said, quote, "Because of my connection to the story through my ex-fiancé, my editors and I have agreed that I won't be involved in any coverage of Kennedy in Playbook or elsewhere at Politico." RFK Jr. is married to Cheryl Hines, the Curb Your Enthusiasm actress. And per the New York Post, Hines was once one of the 43 mistresses RFK Jr. had listed in his phone during his second marriage. The Daily Mail is reporting Hines was seen without her wedding ring in Italy over the weekend following the scandal.
Lots going on here.
So many layers to this.
So
where do we begin?
Okay, so
Okay.
the claim from the RFK Jr. side is that this was one way and unsolicited, and she sent him all these messages, and he blocked her after responding briefly, and then and she persisted, and that's what happened there. The Daily Beast side of it is that no, they were engaged. Now, neither claimed they had an actual physical relationship, so it was just an exchanging of texts going on.
Super important to note, because the internet is not recognizing that there was nothing ever that happened physically between them. It was all via text, as you said. But on the other side, keep in mind, he is 40 years older than her, 39 years older than her. He has a history of this type of behavior. He also has questionable choices in life.
Well,
but he's making
true, but let's.
but he's making it one-sided. What I'm trying to say is
she's an adult.
I'm not discounting that she's an adult, but what I'm saying here is the age dynamic is something to consider. The power dynamic is something to consider. And simultaneously, he is now going on attack against her, saying that he was the victim of her sending texts and photos, when that was based on a friend who somebody probably had go speak to the press, the New York Post, which doesn't have the best editorial oversight. I just find it all very fishy. And if he did share those photos with anybody, that is a crime. So my guess is, yes, if he is to share any sort of sexual photos from somebody else, that is a crime. And so he could potentially have some legal issues, and that might be why he's now going on attack against her, threatening a lawsuit.
I'm thinking, is it a crime?
Yeah, it is.
How? In what way?
It's revenge porn. It's labeled as a type of
Well,
crime.
if it's not, if they're, I think they have to be explicitly pornographic to be in.
They said it was increasingly.
Or racy or increasingly.
Yeah. I mean, that's what's claimed. Obviously, we don't have evidence of that. I assume the outside firm will be going through her phone and trying to figure out what actually happened. It's not great for journalism. I think the story has blown up to a level that is alarming online for her. I mean, it is very sexist, the responses people are saying about her. Not saying that people aren't criticizing RFK, because he's got enough going on in his world. I think what's alarming also is this is a guy who has been seen as a spoiler, and there's all this inside the beltway, how the sausage gets made, and the public loves to see it, especially since she has a very Instagram-worthy life, and there's this, she's a beautiful woman, she's also a great writer, and she was, really ahead in her career for her age, and now that's imploding.
I don't see her as a victim in all this. I don't see him as a victim either. I don't know. I can't tell exact. Obviously, I haven't. If I could read through a transcript of their messages, not that I want to do that, you would, was it one-sided or was it clearly both ways, and just a messy affair they were both having? That is
not uncommon.
Which doesn't matter to me. It's their personal lives. It doesn't matter, even though they're famous people. I don't really care about their personal lives at all. In terms of the journalism, she should not have been doing this, obviously, she's a major a political reporter. Even if she wasn't writing specifically about him, she was covering presidential politics. He was a candidate. Now, I will say the reason, so Olivia Nuzzi is pretty widely despised online by a lot of Democrats because she had that story, which was completely true, the conspiracy of silence around Joe Biden's cognitive decline that made people in Biden world furious. They lost it on her, and that story was completely true. It was completely valid. We all know it was now. And so some of this is people, Democratic Biden people, are toasting her demise for daring to have said something mean about Joe Biden. That is transparently what's going on here. Now, that is a separate issue from what actually occurred, which seems to be some level of consensual affair between people who were involved with other people and they shouldn't have been doing that. Whatever, that's none of our business. I don't care. It does mean she should not have been covering the presidential campaign. I I know that she should lose her job for that, or what. I mean, they were right to look into it and to have her suspended. Seems like that makes sense to me. She is a good reporter, and she has actually published things in the past that make the mainstream media very uncomfortable. But that is not to excuse what went on here. But I don't think she's a victim in that way, although I know people have attacked her for good reporting she did.
I think she's a victim in that the tone of attacks online are really unhinged. I mean, it is a slew of attacks. You know, should she be criticized for breaking journalism ethical standards? Sure. Should she be on leave? Sure. But does that mean that they should be publicly stoning her to death? I mean, the RFK folks, who are really excited online right now, are going after her in deeply misogynistic ways. He gets criticized too, but it's not happening in this story in the same way. And so that is the only layer I'll add, is that even on our side on the left, I've seen it happening. And it's like, you can't just be feminist when you want it. You have to be feminist all around and understand these things. It doesn't mean she wasn't wrong. It doesn't mean that she shouldn't be reprimanded. But it doesn't mean that she should be publicly flogged and burned at the stake.
Well, both, we should, both partners of the two people seem pretty upset about what has happened. Ryan Lizza has called off his engagement to Olivia Nuzzi. As we read, he was involved in his own kind of Me Too thing. They were co-workers at New York Magazine, I think, when they started dating, or somewhere. It was somewhere in media. And then, of course, Cheryl Hines, the wife of RFK Jr., was apparently celebrating her birthday without him, without wearing a wedding ring over the weekend. So there are certainly some hurt feelings among people. But Olivia Nuzzi has had her defender. I looked at this. I thought this was a terrible defense of her from Ben Smith at Semaphore, who I generally like. But he wrote something saying, like, journalists often have important relationships with their sources, not sexual, but it is a relationship. So being like, is this that different? Yes, this is very different.
Yes, that's different.
You should not do this. More Rising right after this. The House Committee on Small Businesses published a scathing report finding evidence of taxpayer-funded censorship in the Global Engagement Center, a counter-messaging operation of the State Department created during President Barack Obama's final year in office, confirming previous reporting by Racket News as well as the Washington Examiner. Now, independent journalist Matt Taibbi said the State Department was guilty of censorship and profound corruption.
The committee wrote earlier this month, quote, "The federal government has funded, developed, and promoted entities that aim to demonetize news and information outlets because of their lawful speech." The committee added that the GEC circumvented its strict international mandate by funding private contractors with domestic censorship capabilities. Joining us now to discuss is Matt Taibbi of Racket News. Thanks, Matt, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So this organization, and there's so many of these alphabet, various funded groups that some are explicitly government, some are nonprofits, some are associated with think tanks or academic departments. So it's all confusing, I think, very much deliberately in order to mask the source of this, which is often actually just the government. But talk to us about what happened here. I know the Global Disinformation Index as the organization that threatened one of my own employers, Reason Magazine, where I also write, said we were an unsafe, a risky news website. They said that to, I think, the Federalist and Daily Caller and some other places like that, and with the goal of persuading advertisers not to work with these sites based on alleged sins that were just totally invented, totally made up, were not accurate, were themselves misinformation, which I called out, and then they quickly changed their mind about that. But describe how this was actually, at the root of it, was government action.
Right, so the Global Disinformation Index, the GDI, that is a UK-based private or quasi-private organization. And this is a very common pattern, by the way, with this whole disinformation scheme, which is that you'll find something, an NGO or some kind of organization that exists outside the United States, but if you trace its funding back, you'll find that it's getting money from the American government. In this case, the money came from the GEC, not the GDI, the GEC, which is the Global Engagement Center, which is a wing of the State Department, which confusingly, from its beginnings, was actually mostly funded by the Department of Defense. But essentially what you're describing is exactly right. So there's the State Department money that is going to a foreign media scoring operation that not only downranks companies according to their safety, but also has something called a dynamic exclusion list, which is just a fancy word for a blacklist, which it again circulates to advertisers and the biggest ones like Google, so that they can then essentially cut off sources of revenue for disfavored media outlets. Now that's explicitly part of their mission, is cutting off revenue as a source for these unsafe outlets. So you have basically an American department which is funding economic damage to American companies, and essentially they're doing this because they're not promoting a point of view that the government would like.
American taxpayers might be surprised to learn that they're paying their government to provide funds to a foreign organization to advise censorship of American citizens' opinions. This is an incredibly complicated situation to end up to do some run around the First Amendment. So this came up in this House report, which was able to confirm not just a lot of what you've talked about here, but also that you and Gabe Kaminsky, who's done a lot of good work on this at the Washington Examiner, there was an attempt to discredit your looking into this.
Yeah, this didn't make me terribly happy. I mean, one of the things we found out as this report came out is that the State Department, in briefing this committee, had some things to say about me personally. They were trying to discredit my reporting by talking about my past, mentioning specifically that I lived in Russia and some unsavory behavior on my part during that time. That's another taxpayer-funded activity I'm not sure I feel very positively about, is having the government try to discredit reporting that's legitimate and factual, using personal smears and that sort of thing. But they also did some sneaky things with Congressman Jim Banks, who had written a letter complaining about this same activity. There's a memo that the committee uncovered talking about Banks with a list of talking points about how to respond to him. And one of them does a very sneaky thing. It quotes him in RIA Novosti, which is a Russian news agency, but the quote didn't come from RIA Novosti. He never talked to RIA Novosti. RIA Novosti took that quote from the Washington Examiner, which is the real source of the quote. So they're trying to create the impression that this congressman was talking to Russian sort of state news agencies, which I thought, that has shades of McCarthyism to it. Very unpleasant, the whole thing.
You also, in your recent piece describing what is going on, you again remind your readers that the moderators at Twitter, who again were the last link in the chain of the attempted censorship, is the State Department funded forces trying to persuading social media moderators that they should take action against pieces of content. And again, you point out that there was actual incredible initial skepticism on the point of the moderators at the company, with Yoel Roth describing the methodology as shoddy and bogus, calling attention to some of these are Russian bots being wrong. It's now been proven to be wrong, totally, the Hamilton 68 list. But that over time, they didn't change their mind. They didn't eventually decide, the State Department and all these forces are right about this. They just decided the cost to them of refusing the government was getting to be too high.
Yeah, and this is a complicated story, and it's one of the harder things to follow in the Twitter files. But essentially, the Global Engagement Center is a relatively new organization in the government. As you mentioned, Barack Obama created it by executive order in 2016. In its previous incarnations, it was a counter-terrorist organization that mostly focused on countering the messaging of groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS. But they turned inward, and they started to look more at domestic speech and domestic operations. And that's why they got into the business of doing things like funding groups that would disfavor or downrank American media outlets. Now, when they came on the scene, there was already a relationship between Twitter and the FBI, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, even the Department of Homeland Security. Twitter essentially had gone through a lot of struggle and it had sort of let these people in the door of their content moderation process and didn't want to let in this new organization. They thought they were shoddy. They thought their methodology was poor, that they jumped to conclusions, that they were politicized. A great example was, one of the examples they brought up was, if you're in the yellow vest, that means that equals Moscow controlled to them, right? So they would just make these leaps of logic that if you are associated with a certain point of view, then that means you're in Moscow's, what they call information ecosystem. It's sort of a guilt by association tactic that Twitter didn't agree with, but they just got so much pressure in the end from other government actors and from lobbying from the State Department that finally they just had to give in, and they allowed the Global Engagement Center to join this sort of spiraling group of government agencies that had a say in moderating content.
Matt, it's not a surprise. Many people talk about shadow banning, especially since 2016, for any folks that may be challenging, mainstream institutions. And I felt it, you felt it, I'm sure you felt it too. With that being said, there's also this other issue that these digital platforms have in that they're not transparent with their algorithms. There are definitely a lot of fake accounts out there boosting certain narratives. So to me, what I find bizarre about this is, the government, we have free speech in this country and it should be protected. But simultaneously, we have platforms that are pushing certain speech higher up in the algorithm for folks to see more, and other speech may just not get out there. And also the weaponization of bots by all different types of actors, domestic, international, everyone does it. Corporations do it. So why wouldn't the U.S. government just deal with that issue so that they don't have this complicated, money funneling scheme with poor methodology that could get somebody on a banned list when they just happen to be wearing a yellow vest that day?
Well, I think they view the private status of these corporations as a positive, because essentially it allows them to outsource activity that would normally be blatantly unconstitutional to private corporations that they have very intricate relationships with. So in the case of all of these internet platforms like Facebook or Twitter or YouTube, any of them, Google, they're all very heavily reliant on essentially government subsidies to exist. And so when, the Senate Intelligence Committee or the Global Engagement Center or the Department of Homeland Security knocks on their door and says, hey, we want to get involved in content moderation, the companies don't really have a lot of latitude to say no. They can kind of put up a little bit of a fight about it. But ultimately, what they end up getting is this situation which is perfect for them, for the government from a legal point of view. We don't have to take the drastic step of doing something baldly constitutional and exercising prior restraint on tens of thousands of posters who are saying things we don't like. We can just sort of nudge the company in that direction, and they can do it, in their mind, completely legally. I would argue that that is illegal and that the fights over that continue. But I think the government wants this arrangement. I don't think they want to focus just on the narrow issue of actual foreign bots and actual bad actors. I think they want to expand their purview into all sorts of different kinds of speech, and this framework allows them to do that very easily and unfortunately with tremendous efficiency.
Matt Taibbi, thank you so much for joining us. Always our pleasure.
Thanks for having me on.
World leaders gather in New York today at the annual UN General Assembly meeting. Other notables, including Elon Musk, will be there too. He's set to introduce his friend and right-leaning Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni at the Atlantic Council Global Citizen Awards dinner. It's created some buzz around foreign policy types. Meanwhile, Musk X seems to be throwing in the towel in Brazil. The platform is complying with court orders that it had previously defied. For context, X and Brazil came to a head last month when the country's Supreme Court ordered the social network to take down accounts that Brazilian Justice Alejandro de Moraes ordered removed. Moraes insisted that the accounts in question threatened Brazil's democracy.
Fast forward to this past Friday, X's legal team in Brazil filed paperwork with the court that the network will comply with the court order, dealing a blow to free speech absolutist Musk. X had been blocked since August, but X's team hopes the courts will allow X to open back up in Brazil.
As if Musk weren't having a bad enough week, the party game Cards Against Humanity is also feuding with SpaceX with a $15 million lawsuit against that company. They claim SpaceX trespassed on a parcel of land on the U.S.-Mexico border that they purchased in 2017 after Trump won, planned to build his border wall. Cards Against Humanity crowdfunded a plan to thwart Trump's proposal. They raised money from 150,000 subscribers to buy the land on the border and prevent the wall from being built. Now they are alleging that SpaceX is encroaching on that land to house building materials for a nearby project. In a statement, the games team wrote that after catching Musk's SpaceX on their turf, Musk's team, quote, gave us a 12-hour ultimatum to accept a lowball offer for less than half of the land's value. We said, go F yourself, Elon Musk. We'll see you in court. So I did not know about the Cards Against Humanity purchasing of a I guess they don't want the border wall built.
I guess not. I don't.
One way to do it is buy the land.
It's an option.
I looked at it, and that's incredible to me that they would think that was a good PR move, is to stop the borders. I mean, it's like the number one issue in the country right now is Americans concerned about the situation at the southern border, and what was popular in 2017 was to make that effort more difficult, but different times.
Well, the government can still, this is an immigration conversation, but the government can still build on the edge of their land because they still have the rights to do that. With that being said, it is fascinating. I wonder if there's a sale on Cards Against Humanity, given how much they're taking on Elon Musk so aggressively. But listen, I mean, what's happening in Brazil, this is a huge market for Elon Musk. And he cried, he had a fit. I'm sure his legal experts around him and his lawyers were advising him to not stand down initially, and here he is. He's
yeah, I don't blame him for standing. I mean, it's not his fault. It's the authoritarian government's fault. Like, this is the same as when China says, okay, Google can be in China, but you can't have any unfriendly search results for Xi Jinping. And then the company says, oh, what do we do about this? And then finally they say, okay, fine. Like, it's bad. It's not the company's fault. What you do when an authoritarian government orders you, do censorship or die, like, that's them. That's their fault. I don't blame the companies for going along with it in order to operate in these countries to some degree, or saying no, or throwing up their hands saying we refuse. Either choice is morally valid. It's just, again, to people hate Elon so much, to like blame him. He put up a fight. He lost the fight because in the end the government is more powerful, and that's unfortunate. But I don't blame him for throwing a fit about it and then going along with it. He obviously still thinks it's bad.
Well, they were asking him to get rid of accounts like bots.
No, they were asking him to get rid of real people.
Disinformation and.
Well, they say it's disinformation.
I understand your reasoning. With that being said, there's also an argument to be made that Brazil, a democracy, not an authoritarian, they have a complicated democratic system. It's not all Lula all day long. With that being said, this decision was to protect some of the disinformation that was being spread within the previous administration under Bolsonaro. There were thousands and thousands of bots. There were actors who were, acting in free speech but being paid to push those messages out. It's not as simple as anybody gets to say whatever they want when the platform's algorithm, as we know, skews in one direction, and then those people are being boosted, and some of those folks are paid actors to say those things. It's not just a regular person on the streets expressing their opinions. It's somebody who has a stake in taking on their democracy.
I mean, some of the accounts that were ordered to be taken down were politicians. They were conservative right-wing politicians. I find that very authoritarian. Yeah, but they're people expressing their views on political issues. I think if in the U.S., this is impossible in the U.S. because we have the First Amendment, but if, the federal government ordered either under Donald Trump or Joe Biden or Kamala Harris, let's say Donald Trump for fun. Trump is president and he orders Facebook delete the accounts of these 800 people, right. Some of them some of them Democrats, some of them political rivals, some of them just random people. We would all call that authoritarian. And you say, well, they're disinformation. That would still be considered authoritarian, right?
Right. I think disinformation as an excuse is being weaponized by all parties, right? they're not getting to the real issue. And the real issue is that Twitter is not being run democratically. You know, there are absolutely thousands, if not millions of bots out there that have agendas from every, I mean, you have big companies, you have foreign adversaries, you have democracies, you have campaigns buying these bots to boost their messaging and go after their rivals. That is not honest, that's not transparent, that's not democratic. Then you have the algorithm, which is not transparent or democratic. The moderation is not transparent or democratic. So the platform is not a true democracy, it's not a true town square. So if these governments, whether it's our government or Brazil or anybody or China, if they really want to make this argument that this needs to be a democratic place and that we believe in free speech, then it actually has to be a democratic place.
Well, but I would say, but the company is not required to operate in a democratic way. No company, in fact, does. I'm working for a company right now. It's not a democracy. There's a boss in charge, and you know you have a certain amount of leeway in terms of your. I mean, I have total leeway to say what I think on the show, and if they didn't like it, eventually they'd fire me or I'd stop working here. But it's not democratic. It's not like a vote of the people who work here. It's a business model. That's how the social media companies work. The democracy ought to be on the point of the government has to conduct itself in a democratic way or in accordance with democratic principles, one of which I would say, the most important one in fact, is free speech. And the whole, I mean, I obviously think the social media companies should be more transparent about how the moderation is done, in part because of how much we learned. We talked to Matt Taibbi about this earlier today, how much of the moderation was being done at the behest of government. So I certainly want more transparency around that, and I want more transparency around the algorithm too. But the algorithm is always, I mean, the algorithm is mostly serving a business interest, right? It wants to show you more of the kind of content you want to engage with.
That's not entirely true. Okay, the business interest is outrage, right? They have psychologically designed these, I mean, there's so much research behind this now, that the more you get somebody addicted, the more enraged they are, the more takedowns, the more outrage that's on these machines, the more people click.
Well, if it bleeds, it leads. That's the media.
Exactly.
There's nothing unique to that about social media. That's just how the media operates.
Well, it's aggressively accelerated on social media.
But I don't know, I see more.
And there's no editors, too. So unlike The Hill or other news publications that are private, there is editorial oversight. Twitter doesn't have that. So, you know, their excuse is we're a private company, but we also think that we should have absolute free speech, but you're not actually an absolute free speech, you know, democratic platform. So if you're going to use that excuse, then you have to use it all around.
But I see more dissenting, contrasting opinions and articles and news and perspectives on social media, on X, than I do in the mainstream media. I see things going every which way. And sometimes you see things that, yes, are blatantly false, and it's fact-checked right on it. There's a community note under it saying why it's blatantly false.
It's not where...
I mean, it's not perfect, but it's starting to be like Wikipedia, I say, which is sometimes wrong, but is usually highly accurate.
It is nowhere near Wikipedia right now. I could open up Twitter right now.
It's going that way, and that's because having top-down, in my view, centralized control of information lends yourself toward massive error, and having bottom-up, crowdsourced, let everyone be their own fact checker, sometimes you have errors, but you often have truth emerging. And that's the way I think social media companies should go. Or also just allowing more customization for the user experience. So like if you don't want to see what the mainstream media considers disinformation, you should be able to just check a box, and then fine, all of that is out of your content. And
Instagram does that now, where you can choose not to see political content or to see political content.
I'm for that.
Which is great, but we're not getting there. And it doesn't even apply to the hate speech. The hate speech is still all over Twitter. You know, threats are all over Twitter, and he's not taking that on. So it's where free speech brushes up against disinformation that affects national security and disinformation that perpetuates hate speech. And I think that's where they're really trying to go at this from. I'm not saying that they're doing it the right way, and these are real issues. There is a real security situation on these social media platforms, whether it's personal security or national security.
I guess I just often don't trust the people saying that, because they have used those two twin justifications, disinformation and hate speech, in the past, not to go after just legitimate foreign threats, but to, you know, demonize, contrarians and conservatives and other people, and
absolutely.
That's why it's very skeptical.
It's an imperfect system, and they're using the loopholes in our free speech laws to go after anybody who stands in their way.
More Rising right after this. after P. Diddy was charged with sex trafficking, racketeering, and transportation to engage in prostitution. Some are asking how Diddy got away with it for so long and who else was involved. The charges stem from what Diddy called, quote, freak-offs, which allegedly included days-long coerced sex acts in hotel rooms that Sean B. Diddy Combs orchestrated and recorded. Now, Diddy seemingly described these freak-offs during a Conan O'Brien interview back in 2002. Let's take a listen to Diddy's response after Conan asked him how to throw a killer party.
Okay, now, we need alcohols.
Right.
Alcohols.
Right. Not just one alcohol.
Alcohols.
Right, just different
Plurals.
blend. You need the
Blends.
ladies, you need the booze.
You need some water.
For watering plants?
No.
What?
No, I don't know if guys have noticed this, like, a lot of ladies drink water at parties. They
Right.
just, you know, so you have, if you don't have what they need, they're gonna leave.
Right.
Gotta
right.
keep them there.
Right.
You need locks on the doors.
Okay, this is sounding kind of dangerous now.
It's a little kinky, but
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
rock with me, but just
Right.
check it out. You need a lot of heat. A lot of heat. Yeah.
Heat. You mean that physically the place has to be hot?
You don't have no air conditioning.
No air conditioning.
No.
Why is that?
Heat affects the alcohol, and it also affects, like, you know, everybody gets a little bit more comfortable and loose. Builds up a nice little sweat.
That just sounds disgusting. What are you talking about?
Depends on the way you look at it.
Depends. Oh, people
Yeah.
start getting gets kind of sexy. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, you sexy.
During a federal raid of Diddy's home, agents uncovered 1,000 bottles of baby oil. The indictment says Combs, quote, Combs relied on the employees, resources, and influence of the multifaceted business empire that he led and controlled, creating a criminal enterprise whose members and associates engaged in and attempted to engage in, among other crimes, sex trafficking, forced labor, kidnapping, arson, bribery, and obstruction of justice. The indictment listed Combs' security staff, household staff, personal assistants, high-ranking supervisors, and others among the associates who made up a criminal organization. Publicly, Diddy has been closely linked to countless celebrities, including Jay-Z, Justin Bieber, Usher, J-Lo, and Ashton Kutcher, to name a few. Diddy pleaded not guilty to all the charges, and a judge has denied bail. Wow. So,
yeah, we're revisiting some of these things that Diddy has said over the years and also people in his orbit. I can remember watching a video of Usher describing living with Diddy when he was just 14 or 15 at the time and having older women who were above the age of consent, kind of the Diddy arranging for him to lose his virginity that way. When he was very underage. That was something that got revisited when first the kind of accusations against Diddy were coming out. And there's been other things like that over the years. This could be Justin Bieber.
He had custody of Justin Bieber, and it seems, I think he also had custody of Usher at the time. Why parents would allow that to happen?
Well, that's the Michael Jackson story
exactly.
all over again.
It's predatory behavior.
I mean, there has to be some responsibility. I don't know if this is gonna be a hot take or not. Some responsibility on the families and the parents, right? I mean, that I felt that while watching like the Michael Jackson trial too. Like now you want some. You were a neglectful parent, and now you want some payday because of it.
Also, keep in mind, they're selling a
Sorry,
dream
Phil.
to them, which Justin Bieber and Usher did receive. There was evidence that, you know, P. Diddy will invest in you as a producer and coach you and take, you know, several hours of training all day long to prepare you for your celebrity. And he did that with Danity Kane. He's produced countless musicians over the years, but at the same time, it comes at an expense. And whether the parents knew that, because he would isolate them from them, it's classic predatory behavior, right?
This could be Hollywood's Epstein Island.
Absolutely.
Is how this is
Without
going
a
to turn
doubt.
out to be. Celebrities in Diddy's orbit are nervous. I'm seeing reports of various people deleting their public social media profiles, that kind of thing. I think people are worried about being criminally complicit in what went on.
Or associated. I mean, say you went to one of these parties and you went early in the night. It was an after party. Plenty of people have talked about this on social media. And then something steamed off and then you left. But you don't want to be grouped in.
You slipped on the baby oil that was just coating the walls and the floors, and it was like 100-gallon tanks of baby oil, right? Or something like that's why I read something.
It is wild what kind of operation he had in place. He had secret cameras. He was taping folks without them even knowing, which of course is a crime. He had the baby oil. He was locking doors, as he said, to Conan O'Brien, and Conan O'Brien's reaction.
It's that uncomfortable kind of
Yeah.
Reminds me of the skit from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, Dennis and Mac, where Dennis is talking about we're gonna buy a boat, so we bring people out on the boat, and she's not gonna say no, and Mac's like, are you gonna hurt these women? It's like, no, they just wouldn't say no because they're out in the ocean. Like, I'm sorry, you're gonna engage in rape? It's very much that kind. No one would, we're not saying we're going to do any bad thing, but we're locking the doors and we're recording, so nobody's gonna resist. Very, very bad. Very, very bad kind of stuff.
Very bad. And the fact that he would say that out loud at that point just shows the other side of it, which is he had so much power, he had so much money, he's such a large part of the music industry, and as a result, protected. He had AR-15s for himself, not for his security guards. There's a case to be made.
Well,
for
I support the Second Amendment. You can have guns.
Sure, but for what point? What do you need an AR-15 for? And you're locking people inside and holding them hostage?
Well, I don't know that that's been alleged.
He locked the doors on them. So.
Well, he joked about locking the doors to Conan O'Brien. I don't know if he actually locked the doors. That would be bad if he did. What has been alleged, to be clear, is forcible. Is not just wild sex parties where maybe it strikes us as a bit much, but people do whatever they want. It's not our business. It is wild sex parties that included forcible sex and video cameras and underage people and all sorts of very.
This was
bad
not
stuff.
a bacchanal.
Not just like.
This was not a bacchanal after party. This was something that affected people who are underage, plenty of women. We saw that video of him beating Cassie, and now there are reports from his former bodyguards saying that they often had to break him apart from other women that he had dated over the years, and other behaviors where there was a report that he had urinated in a pitcher, and Tupac's ex-girlfriend had grabbed the pitcher, who's Quincy Jones' daughter, and was about to drink it, thinking it was beer, and the bodyguard had to step in, and Diddy clearly did not intervene.
That also reminds me of a It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia skit where Charlie keeps accidentally drinking urine because he keeps getting handed bottles of. And anyways, neither here nor there. If the viewers have seen this, you'll know what I'm talking about. That's awful, and he should be locked up based on that basis.
It's psychotic behavior, and the fact that it can go unchecked for that long, or that the bodyguards have to basically act as buffers when they know, and maybe that's why they're being charged with being complicit in that they're employed, they know, they intervened in some situations, but they never went to authorities. And how many people may have not even realized the scale of this and how organized it was, because it is run by as an operation, just as Epstein was. And
that was going on since 2002.
Yeah.
It's going on for the last 20 years.
One thing we're learning, the 2000s, not great.
Well, not great in terms of sex trafficking. Yeah.
Sex trafficking,
Yeah.
how young women were portrayed in the media. I mean, we hear these stories about how Paris Hilton was sent to that camp and then she was abused. You hear the stories of other women in the music industry who were abused by people like P. Diddy and others. It was a really rough time, and there was very little oversight. And I just want to know why the authorities took so long when these weren't necessarily secrets, as we're learning. Why did they? It's one thing for the music industry not to police itself, because there's a lot of money in this on the other end. But the law enforcement knew about much of this for years and years. What took them so long?
Well, now he's facing a potential life in prison sentence from all of these charges: sex trafficking, racketeering, prostitution, et cetera, and so on. So we will, I'm sure, be covering this.
And
for
50
a long
Cent
time.
has a documentary coming out about it on Netflix.
Really?
About his deal.
That does it for us today on Rising. Thanks so much for tuning in. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any of our content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, now available anywhere you can find podcasts. See you back here tomorrow.